type of crash is assigned a dedicated cost just in the industry. So like a property damage only crash is worth like $10,000 in analysis, whereas a fatality is worth much more. A serious injury is worth more. A minor injury is worth a certain amount. So that's kind of where those like actual cost numbers come from. And then what we can do is look at all of the crashes at certain locations and add up those costs. And it allows us to have a better comparison between intersections to be able to see where we can potentially make the most of it. To be able to use our resources as best as we can to make the most improvement.
Part of that too is just to make it so that it's really natural to look at raw numbers and say this particular intersection has a very large number of crashes. So we want to tackle that one first. But if that's kind of an expected number of crashes for an intersection like that, it might not make sense to put the money for a particular category towards that one when you can make a more significant improvement somewhere else. That's not to say we're not going to consider all of them or anything like that. It just allows us to be more effective in using money at the locations that will be most make the biggest difference.
And then I did notice in that chart that there seemed to be an increase, I believe, in crashes in 2020, which kind of surprised me because that's when traffic was lower. And I'm wondering if street racing was a part of that. How does street racing come into play in any of these crashes? I work out a lot of times at 5 a.m. I'll be quite honest, I-25 is quite scary at 5 a.m. heading into Denver. There's a lot of racing going on. I don't know if that's part of that. And I forget which slide it does not give me. 13.
I'm not sure if this is still here. Let's see.
I'm not quite sure of everything.
Okay, I think it's perfect. Yeah, we can definitely go back to that slide here.
Oh yeah, just got it.
This one here. Okay, yeah. So I think the biggest thing to point out here is that in a small community like the field, those fatal crashes where we don't have too many per year, even like one or two can make a big difference. So even though there was less traffic, there could be some volatility in that data. So I think that would be maybe the biggest reason why there might be a spike. It could just be that volatility that we're seeing in that fatal crash data. As we saw, the actual total number of crashes was much further down, which doesn't have that volatility that we're seeing in the data.
I'm just looking at the serious crash.
Yeah. So Bryce was getting at it too, that while the overall crashes went down, serious injury crashes went up. And we often find that when it's related to speed. And because overall traffic went down during 2020, speed can often go up with less traffic. That, Joe, would you?
Yeah, I can see that as a driver.
Again, I think you're right on target. This is something that's not unique to Broomfield. This was something that we saw throughout the state. When we look at this, and this is total crashes, and there was the big drop in 2020. The serious injury crashes didn't necessarily follow that trend, and so that's something that there's no concrete evidence on exactly what it was. But there's a lot of hypothesizing that it's because of just what Alicia was just saying. What you're thinking is that because there's less traffic on the roads, there was more speeds. So.
And then I do support this with Vision Zero. I would like to know if there's any sort of statewide plan. I know that Vision Zero, and even when I started in 2019, that was sort of their mission. Is there anything as a state that they're working where it's not like Dr. Cog and Broomfield, but and that's my last question, I swear.
Yeah, I can't remember if we had it up there on one of the first slides. CDOT does have a reduction proposal or a reduction goal that they're looking at as well. And so it's interesting to see how they all fit together because the years are different depending on what year they did their plan and the metrics are different. To Councilmember Leslie's note about percentage reduction every year. So CDOT's, I don't know, up at the beginning, CDOT's reduction is 15% in 3 years with their plan.
I would like to even push towards a better state plan that would coincide with what we're doing too. So thank you.
All right, thank you. We're gonna go to Councilmember Lim online. We're checking her audio and she had her hand up, but I don't know her. So Councilmember Lim, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And then
but we
I do
can't hear
support
her.
this
So
Vision
you're
Zero.
still-
I would like to
Go ahead
know
and
if there's any sort of
answer the question.
statewide plan.
We'll
I know
be
that
able to
Dr.
come
Cobb
back
is
to you.
working on
Councilmember
Vision
Cohen?
Zero, and even when I started in 2019, that was sort of their mission.
The follow-on
Is there
Councilmember
anything
Hanks' question that
as
I'm
a
premature
state
on
that
this.
we are working
The next
towards, not only
stage
with
of
Dr.
this,
Cog and Broomfield, but
in your
as a
data
state?
crunching already now. Are you gonna come back to us with
And that's my last question, I swear.
causation and correlation? And,
Yeah,
is
one
it
of the-
infrastructure,
I
is
can't
it
remember
just
if we had it
behavior?
up there on one of
Some
the first
them are
slides.
At that, there's more crashes at that time. I mean, what's actually causing this and whether fixing infrastructure make a difference or it's behavior?
Yeah, so we definitely are. So next steps for the plan are to break that down further, do those actual road safety audits and figure out exactly what we should be doing at some of these locations, what are some of the programmatic changes that we can make throughout the city. And then actually put that into the plan. In terms of coming back to see council, we are planning to come back for adoption of the plan in October. I believe we have our date scheduled. So actually to adopt the plan and you'll be able to see the entire the full draft showing what we're going to be proposing, the exact issues that are going on, and so forth.
So we'll have some sense whether there are intersections that have need better signage, need speed control, or is it just change in lighting, timing?
No, yeah, definitely. That's a really good suggestion. And that's something that we've started to do with our vision and goals. Each goal is going to be assigned strategies to it. And like you said, lighting, that could be one strategy that we identify to improve safety. Something that we look for in the crash report forms is, when did this happen? Was it dark when it happened? Was it light? So there are ways to break that down further. And that's definitely what we plan on doing as a part of the final plan.
I'm just curious, I'm sure the number crunchers have done these before. Typically, I'm gonna guess it's mostly behavior, which is why this seems like a very aggressive goal to change behavior by that much versus it's an infrastructure paint job or light job or speed control. Am I wrong in that, or that we're mostly looking at people driving too fast or driving inappropriately in the weather?
So each crash has a behavior and a cause and a type of crash and everything. So in each crash, you can actually pick out all of those things. And so the biggest question is how to combine those infrastructure changes and people's behavior changes and things like that to make this go a reality, right? And so there are proven countermeasures that have been studied federally to address specific locations or any of those locations where they have the excess crash costs. And then you also have those more systemic approaches too. And Joe, the data guy, can help us figure out exactly which ones of those will add up best in the least amount of money in order to make that goal a reality. So it's not just randomly trying to take these numbers down, but figuring out what combination of physical infrastructure changes versus public.
The only reason I was curious because you had the table with all the rates. And 3 cities popped out at the bottom with Commerce City, Brighton, and Pueblo, which are also 3 of the poorest cities in the state. So is there a correlation with affluence that might be a contributing factor why Broomfield's toward the top in terms of one of the safer cities?
Yeah, so we definitely were, we thought that question might be coming, so we were brainstorming it a little bit. And it honestly is a little bit speculative for us at this point. You know, there might be some correlation to, are there limited access highways? What's the socioeconomic status? Yeah, how new is the infrastructure? Is there newer design standards? How dense is the population? So there are a number of things that we have discussed, but it seems to be maybe a little bit speculative at this point.
Thank you. And several small questions and I'll hand it over. The bike rules changed recently where bikes can go through stop signs and lights. Has that had any impact negatively?
There's not been any impact that we've noticed yet. Again, it's fairly recent that happened, so I need a little more data before we can say with any certainty.
And I had an anecdotal question because as a driver in Broomfield, the thing that pops out to me the most are red lights. Every week I see someone go through a red light and no one goes through a red light slowly. So there's a speed factor. So I'm curious if that ever rises. It sounds like it's not as big a factor as perhaps it just anecdotally feels like it's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, so right angle crashes are what happens, you know, when somebody flies through a red light. As we saw from the pie chart, right angle crashes is the most severe type of crash that we have in Broomfield, in terms of percentages, that is. So it's definitely something that we would want to look at. You know, what type of policy do we have around the all red time? Maybe, you know, maybe we want to do something in Broomfield that is more significant than something that the rest of the country is doing, to maybe try to improve safety in that regard.
Like red light cameras.
Red light cameras could be a good option as well.
I have to answer one quick question for you. I learned recently that the length of the yellow light is related to the speed. It's 1 second per the speed or something like that.
Yes, so there is a formula for both the yellow and red times, speed and then width of the intersection.
I wish I'd known that, you know, when I started driving 40 years ago, I could figure out how long the yellow light is going to.
Yeah.
It's like today's years old figuring that out. The other thing that is an anecdotal irritant here is this strikes me, maybe I'm just an older driver and cranky, that fewer and fewer people know the rules of the road. And I can't tell you the number of times I've gone in to turn left and I sit there while a person stares at me who's turning right. And we do hand gestures like, no, go. No one seems to know who has the right of way. And I don't know if that can be addressed. It feels like our driver education is missing something there, or new drivers just don't know. Anyway, that's just a comment. I know you don't have an answer.
I'm more cranky though.
Yeah, okay. I'm getting cranky.
Actually, too, that was a big comment from our external stakeholder meeting. We had a lot of like elementary school principals attend, and that was something that came up as a possible strategy in that meeting. You know,
Maybe it's
get
because
some elementary education.
it might be because I turn left every day to go to work and I'm invariably sitting there doing gestures. On your count direction, I guess I'm really cranky tonight. I feel like a rule of zero is not going to ever be attained. It's people, and there's always going to be accidents. I would prefer a little bit more emphasis on bike safety, because we know if the bike gets hit, that person's going to dead most likely. Bikers are a severe threat when they go out on our roads, and we don't have anything other than paint and prayers to hope, you know, they're safe. So personally, I would shift this. My emphasis, if we can do what we can, we should do what we can to reduce, make our roads as safe as possible. And educate drivers as much as possible, but I feel like the most vulnerable people, in addition to pedestrians, are people on bikes and not well protected. And so I'd love to see that as part of the goal in the mission statement. That's it.
Remember, we're gonna go to Councilmember Lim, questions, she put them, so, first one is, what makes staff confident in recommending that council can include CDOT roads in our goals? CDOT didn't meet target reduction of 15% from 2020 to 2023.
So, yeah, so CDOT highways is definitely something that we don't have quite as much control over as, say, like, 120th or State Highway 7. We have much more coordination with CDOT on safety projects there. We did include it mainly because we wanted to identify that that is our goal to get there. We don't just want to be satisfied with only solving the problem on Broomfield roads. We want this to be not only a Broomfield goal, but all nationwide, including CDOT highways. So, yeah.
That's fair. So that total that we're looking at includes on CDOT roads, right? That 5.5 average fatalities per year is including all the roads.
Yep, correct. And I think it was 4 of those fatalities that were included in that figure were on CDOT highways.
Follow up, does staff anticipate that the impact of the new state texting law will be helpful in reducing distracted driving crashes?
Yeah, so I think having the law in place does help. But that being said, behavioral changes take time. If you're so changing behavior isn't just going to be making the law and then stopping there. I think there's still education and enforcement efforts that we making on our end to really hit that point home to make it most effective.
All right, thank you. Well, what we're going to do now is take a quick break so we can reset our system. The AV team is working on a back-end audio issue, which is impacting some of the issues on Zoom and possibly streaming. So let's go ahead and take a break. And how do we have an estimated time? How long it might take? Should we do 10 minutes, 15? We don't need. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. So we'll be back at 7:05. Thank you.
Here, I'll pop back and reboot that computer. Hey.
Alice. Sixth wife. We just got
Having a fun night.
No.
No, but I'll
be here for support.
Appreciate it.
But you could listen already.
But
Looks like it.
I could listen, but they couldn't hear me.
When you talked.
But it's not, public, the public on, other things. And, you know.
Yeah.
Require a lot more effort to do all.
Oh, I thought you were. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are we gonna die on the not gonna feel. Yeah. That's why I'm in the plane going. I know you took a flare. Oh, it's like Charles. Yeah. Oh, video. How we make in our brain.
Just thought, oh, that's just.
Test.
Yeah.
No, I think we got it. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Hey, 1 2 3 4. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Hey, 1 2 3 4. Check 1 2. Just ended this call. Okay. Testing 1 2. Testing. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Welcome back, everybody. We got a thumbs up, so we're going to go ahead and resume our study session. Let me know when we're ready to go. All right. Welcome back to part 2 of our study session. We were still on the first item, which is the Broomfield Transportation Safety Action Plan update. And we'll continue with council member comments and questions. Next is council member Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. So first of all, I just wanted to say, I'm glad we are using the term crashes instead of accidents. I think accidents implies that, oh, there's nothing we can do to prevent this. This is just going to happen when it's not. These are not all inevitable things. So I appreciate that. Second, I wanted to ask about what kind of strategies do you want to implement in order to get to this Vision Zero? I got a few things in mind, but I'd love to hear your thoughts first.
Okay, so yeah, we do have some strategies that, you know, we've identified with our internal stakeholder groups. And let me go to that slide here. So yeah, we are aiming our strategies to be after these goal themes. So in crash reduction, there's a lot of things that we can do. We want to use proven countermeasures. You know, just as like an example, approach turns where you have a left turning vehicle turning in front of another vehicle, going the opposite direction is one of the most crashes that we see, severe outcome crashes. So a countermeasure for that could be instead of using a flashing yellow arrow, using the protected red arrow as an example of a countermeasure. Some of these other ones, efficient and safe emergency response. A proposed countermeasure could be including a emergency response group or creating a crash review team. So if we see a fatality, we have a dedicated team of individuals to meet and identify what happened. Why do we need to do that? What do we need to do to fix that issue? Promoting responsible travel behavior. There's social media is a big something that we can utilize now to get the word out and provide some education. So social media campaigns or something along those lines could be a strategy that we have. And you know, we've gone through this list and identified things that we can utilize. I would love to hear some of your thoughts too, though, as well.
Yeah, no, I think those are great. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the very comprehensive view that you all have. I know from my perspective, the thing I worry a lot about are cyclists, and I really, really worry about pedestrians. So that's kind of where my thoughts are mostly at. For those lane width, just the fact that our lanes are crazy wide. I mean, I think about Boulder on 28th Street, for instance. When there are people driving, it is very uncomfortable to go over 30 miles per hour. Like you cannot, because those lanes are just so narrow. I mean, I'll feel like I'm going super fast. I look at the speedometer, it's 28 miles per hour, right? So just that enclosure really forces people to go a lot more slowly. Narrowing the road at intersections. I promise this is not just a PSA for the city of Boulder. Even though I'm a big fan. But something that comes to mind is kind of narrowing the area for pedestrian crossings, right? So there's an area by Chautauqua, kind of where you park before you go hiking, some of the overflow residential parking. And there's this one narrowing of the street. It has those, not bollards because they are like movable. They would bend if you bumped into them, but these kind of bollard-like things where they narrow the intersection and then it's painted a different color there. And I kid you not, every single time, even though in my huge heavy EV, there's no way I'm gonna lose in a fight against, you know, this versus my car, but it's always like 20 miles per hour, if not 15, right? I'm like really slowing down quite a bit just because of that constriction. So I'm a big fan of doing those sorts of things and considering that wherever it makes sense. Obviously, it's not going to be totally feasible for some of those bigger streets, but I think for some of those roads, it's something that I would love to see more of because at least anecdotally, I feel they're very effective. And then finally, the separating out of bike lanes, that's the expensive one, right? The other ones are redoing paint, which is, I'm sure, a lot less expensive, or getting a temporary barrier, right? Those are less expensive, but even just starting with, I think those kind of pins, those movable pins to separate out a bike lane, I think could be a really good start in a few places. So I would just love to see us making some of those steps, especially for people where you don't have, you know, a ton of metal between you and something else oncoming. But this is really exciting. I will say that I was so heartened to see that we're pursuing this Vision Zero, and it's really exciting. So I really want to thank you all for coming up with this and all your work here. And I guess that alludes to my last comment, which is I'm very much supportive of this. I think this is great. I think that the sooner we wait to do things, the more family members, the more friends, the more loved ones are going to be lost in ways that are totally preventable. And that doesn't even count the people whose lives are irreparably changed from car crashes. So thank you for this. And those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Marsh Holshan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Kind of echoing everybody else's comments before me, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I fully support this, moving forward with this. I do like the idea of, as Councilmember Delgado was mentioning, of specific things that we can do. I know that sounds like something that's gonna be coming forward in the future, as you kind of go through the analysis. One thing I am seeing that I'm kind of would like to see different in the goals. I noticed that in the presentation, the third tier, the third circle in the Venn diagram was perception, perceived safety. And I don't see that really reflected in the draft goals. And I receive a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails on people's perception. It's the speed, and you saw that in the presentation, 57% of people feel like the speeds on residential streets are too high. I get emails regularly on midway speeds, especially west of Sheridan. So I really would like to see the perception, it's not just fixing the actual problems, it's also fixing the perception. And that's because that's important to people's quality of life. So a couple of specifics that I would have, and things that I've mentioned in the past, I think. One would be, I'd like us to look at the use of speed cameras, especially on like Midway or that kind of area, and red light cameras, as Councilmember Cohen mentioned earlier. And the other one that I'd really like us to see us to look at is reducing or eliminating the requirement for neighborhood approval for calming measures. I know a lot of times you get streets that are just too fast, people driving too fast on residential streets, and we send out the survey and then, it doesn't hit the 2/3 or whatever, I think it's 2/3, doesn't quite hit that mark. I just don't think, I've mentioned this before, I just don't think that's appropriate, that we should be basing safety on people's convenience. So I'd like to see something like that also incorporated in this. But overall, I appreciate this and I'm looking forward to this going forward. And so I think those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And Councilmember Wynn.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much for the presentation, staff. My question, I guess, before I go to my feedback is, when we look at 0%, the idea of the concept of zero is kind of hard for me to grasp on, similar to Councilmember Cohen saying that it's impossible to have zero, accidents because you can't really predict that. And I know this is, guidelines from Dr. Cog. Do you know by chance the reasoning for that? Like, is it just like kind of like a feel good, kind of like, hey, we want to make sure zero accidents happen, or is there like a metric where we can, truly capture that?
Yeah. So I did one kind of clarification too is we're talking about zero of the severe outcome crashes, not the total. But also in regards to Dr. Cog's Vision Zero plan, I have not read the entire plan, but I do know that they have included a lot of outreach and research into that plan. And as the regional government, that's kind of where we think that it's appropriate to align with them on that. There are some other communities doing plans as well that have come up with different targets. And we just felt like that Dr. Cog provided the best landmark for our plan.
Yeah, no, and just overall feedback, I support it. I support the statements and the changes because it does give us a guideline. And you never know, in 15 years, 2040, we have drivable vehicles that is all automated and we don't worry about car accidents. And, the streets are wide enough where residents don't have to worry about, getting hit by a vehicle or, bike lanes are available widely and bikers can ride their bikes around safely. So I support all, everything here, and these goals I think are important because it does make a community safer. It does provide staff guidance, hopefully to make sure that folks feel comfortable in the community. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bryce, for the presentation, second time around. So I guess I do have a couple questions. My first one, and these are actually questions that I had presented in my report from NLC's City Summit Conference in Tampa. We've been talking about data and making data-driven decisions this whole night. Do we have a way of tracking, let's say, near misses? So that way we really are getting a full picture of where not just accidents, but where potential accidents are occurring.
Yeah, that's a really good point and something that, you know, isn't necessarily going to show up directly in the crash data. A couple of the ways that, you know, we can identify that near miss is part of that perception. That third circle in that Venn diagram. So that's certainly one way that we can try to zoom in on that. There are also other ways like actual physical observation that has been done in the past, going to an intersection and actually counting near misses. So that is something that has been done in the industry. So those are kind of the two primary ways that I see of maybe trying to zone in on near miss crashes.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that they're part of the predictive nature of pieces of this analysis should help cover some of those near misses, right? If we can anticipate that a intersection of a particular type may have more, you know, of a particular type of crash, that may cover some of the near misses that are happening. And there's also technology out there. It's still very few communities are doing it because it's still pretty difficult and it's still very expensive to use traffic cameras and big data analysis of just seeing movements of some of those vehicles to show, hey, these vehicles pass near each other in the same space within an X amount of time. Therefore, there was a near miss as well. So it's right now it's mostly cost prohibitive for most communities, but sometime, you know, we could have it as a suggestion in the plan as well to pursue that when it's feasible.
Okay, thank you. And just to further reiterate, we're also talking about pedestrian and bike near misses, not strictly automobile near misses. And so to go off that, your first point about, you know, people reporting, do we have a mechanism for people to report those outside of soliciting feedback for a report we have to do for a grant?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can definitely do a better job of, being equitable to everybody in the community. You know, we have like our contact information listed on our website, but does everybody know to go there? Does everybody know which department to click on and whatnot? So I think that there's definitely improvement that we can make to make ourselves more available to the people in the community.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe something like our pothole program that we have where you can just easily put in that information and it's right there on the main website would be probably better than having to sift through our websites and figuring out where to go. So that's the first one. And then the second question I have is, do we do any sort of post-incident analysis of the data we collect on a serious injury accident, a fatality accident, or even just a minor accident?
So we definitely look at those crashes, but we don't have a dedicated review, like crash safety review team for those crashes. So that's something that we definitely have identified as a strategy. Identifying which people need to be there for those road safety audits when we see a severe injury crash or a severe outcome crash, I should say.
Okay, great. I'll be interested to see what those recommendations are when you give the second presentation in October, I believe is what you said. Besides that, I would just reiterate everything that Councilmember Delgadillo has said. And I agree with the recommendation that staff has for going with the DRCOG vision and mission statements.
All right, thank you very much. And Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I will just start by saying I absolutely agree with these goals. I think that's fine, but I just want to know, so looking at this, when I first saw the trying to get to zero roadway fatalities and serious injuries seems pretty lofty. And then I realized in there that you have to set a goal of zero injuries and serious fatalities. Is there a reason why you picked the first one and not the ambitious percentage reduction as one where you would make that interim step, which is sort of what Councilmember Leslie was referring to? Was it just because it aligned with DRCOG, or was there more and others, or is there?
Yeah, I think we're definitely open to that. You know, and we wouldn't expect it to be like, okay, there's no improvement and then it's 2040 and all of a sudden we have a large drop. You know, we would expect it to be like incremental. So I think that's definitely something that like we're open to having, you know, a formalized interim step.
Which would kind of be like number 2, but wrapped into number 1. Is that?
Yeah.
The other one was just like say that interim goal. Okay. Yeah, and I'm fine with the just picking those dates and going forward. I was just curious if there's a reason why. Yeah, I agree with staff, and I would love to see those interim goals. I don't know if it's like I don't think it's linear. I think it's like it's going to take time to implement things, so it might be further along before we start to see them. So I'm open to that, but tracking the progress would be really good as we try to get to that goal. And then the only, there's a lot of good feedback here tonight. I just want, the one goal that stuck out to me was the promote responsible travel behavior, which has already been raised. And if you know, for feedback on that one, I very much feel that this has to be also a huge piece of enforcement and actual repercussions for the one I hear a lot is the speeding and the street racing. That still comes up from time to time, and there's no way we're going to achieve these goals unless that is seriously addressed. And I know there's been huge efforts around it. I just want to flag that one because I've heard about it again recently up on Colorado 7. So it just feels like there has to be a huge enforcement piece on that one. Other than that, though, I think this is great, and I look forward to seeing the plan come back. So thank you.
Sorry, I went to get some water. Any other council member questions or comments? Councilmember Lim, do you want to let's test your audio? Say hi.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Great, it works. Okay, so
Great.
your own
Thank you.
questions moving forward. All right, well, thank you all so much for your work on this, and I think you got some positive direction to support the recommendations.
Yep, definitely.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, thank you everybody for your feedback, and we look forward to coming back in October.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And next is an overview of the coordinated update to Broomfield's planning and development regulations. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, big shout out to the traffic team. It was a significant lift, and we're very grateful. Ms. Merwin, the floor is now yours.
Thank you,
Regarding the
Manager
development
Hoffman.
review code.
Good evening, Mayor. I'm not sure if Mayor Pro Tem is on and Council. Good evening, Lynn Merwin, Deputy Director of Community Development for Planning. The study session this evening is our third study session in 3 years regarding a multi-year effort to update Broomfield's planning and development regulations. To date, we have found we can undertake many of these initiatives incrementally with existing staff and resources. This approach does require a certain degree of flexibility as we need to balance these updates with our core responsibilities related to current development review. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide lists the overarching goals guiding this effort, including ensuring consistency of new initiatives with Broomfield's community goals, modernizing zoning approaches to address issues and priorities in Broomfield, such as infill and redevelopment, mixed use, multimodal transportation support, environmental sustainability, and inclusive design. We also have the goal of providing efficient and easy to use development review processes. Number 4 is ensuring greater transparency and opportunities for the public to be informed and to opt to engage in new development proposals if desired. And then finally, to address new state mandated legislative requirements as directed. Next slide, please. So before I address our proposed work focus for 2025, I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our key accomplishments in 2024 related to the adoption of new or updated ordinances. And all of these updates were reviewed and discussed and ultimately approved by council and represent just a portion of our work. Council also considered several other initiatives as part of several study sessions that took place in 2024, and those are available to review in the agenda report. So new this year included a tree preservation ordinance applying best practices for tree preservation, new zoning districts, 3 new zoning districts, 2 mixed use and 1 for transit oriented. And this allowed for us to have another option besides PUD zoning for these types of uses. To update to the development review processes addressing rezoning applications and inactive applications, an update to the residential home occupancy code, removing references to familial relationships, and then large family childcare homes. This update allows these homes as home occupations, and the asterisk ones, the last 2 were legislative mandates, grew out of legislative mandates from prior years. Next slide, please. So this slide lists our anticipated priority planning efforts for 2025 based on council's direction provided to staff during study sessions held last year. So these include launching the comprehensive plan major update, launching the I-25 sub-area plan major rewrite, updating the building code regarding energy code strengthening, and we do anticipate a follow-up study session on this one in Q2 of this year. Developing a fast-track development review process for eligible income-aligned housing developments. These are all multi-year efforts. So we'll be beginning work on these, and that will continue for at least another year or part of a year. Next slide, please. This slide identifies anticipated priority planning efforts in 2025, but all of these items are listed at this time because they address legislative mandates. And I will note that the city and county attorney recently provided a legal memo to you all regarding options relating to the following legislative mandates and Broomfield's Home Rule Local Land Use Authority, which you can consider alongside the following bills. So here we see we anticipate perhaps an update to the accessory dwelling unit regulations, which you'll hear more about in the next item on the agenda tonight. An update to the parking minimums and EV parking. And based on a study session held last June, we also will be addressing eliminating parking minimums for select land uses within defined parking reduction areas, adding a new parking reduction area in the vicinity of 120th and 287, and then considering potential revisions to existing short-term bicycle parking requirements. So all that will be coming back to you in accordance with the prior study session last June. The third bullet here notes we anticipate addressing a multi-year effort related to transit-oriented communities, the famous House Bill 241313. So this one requires communities like Broomfield to establish certain zoning capacity or what is referred to a housing opportunity goal. So this is another multi-year effort that we will be working on. Fourth on this list would be the adoption of a wildland urban interface building code for development occurring adjacent to open lands. And this ordinance will likely follow the state model code that is currently being developed. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. We have one more. Sorry. Go back one. So the fifth bullet on this slide is the anticipated update to the zoning code to address natural medicine and psilocybin or mushroom healing centers, along with certain marijuana uses set to sunset in the Broomfield Municipal Code in early April. So this new state law prohibits municipalities from banning or effectively prohibiting the establishment or operation of licensed healing centers or licensed healthcare facilities from providing natural medicine, among other provisions. We are planning a study session within the next couple months to present the specific details to council. And as a local government, we may impose reasonable regulations on permitting and operations of these healing centers. We just can't prohibit them. I will note that a moratorium could potentially be proposed for council consideration if there is an increased interest in by the business community in locating natural medicine healing centers in Broomfield before we can draft and adopt the regulations for these uses. So I did want to just highlight that for you. I think to date, we've had one request, at least at the time of the memo. Finally, we anticipate we will be updating our landscape regulations to limit the use of non-functional turf in an effort to reduce water demand in the state. So all of these, again, are legislative mandates that we are being asked to comply with this year, or in the case of landscaping, by January 1st of next year, so effectively this year. Okay, now the next slide. Thank you. So this slide lists, again, planning efforts that have a flexible time frame and could potentially begin in 2025 if existing staff and resources allow. So these include development of a public land dedication ordinance, potential development of a historic preservation plan, potential update to the medium and high-density residential zone districts to allow denser development and remove PUD standards, consideration of a potential ordinance limiting developers' ability to prepay water and sewer license fees. We like to see those paid in the same year where the permits are issued. To consider potential ordinances or standards regarding offsite construction staging. Consider time-limited and metered parking for certain public roadways to establish time restrictions to address concerns received by the community. And I believe this was just one community member who brought this one up. All of these first 6 items will have study sessions. We expect would have study sessions anticipated with each of them before we proceeded. And then the last 3 continue consideration of rezoning certain Broomfield-owned properties to promote transparency of uses and streamline development review. A technical update to Broomfield's engineering standards and specifications. So we look to alternate that with a technical update in 1 year and then more of a major update in another year. And then finally, any potential new ordinances resulting from this year's Colorado General Assembly legislative session. Next slide, please. So this slide lists ongoing efforts we anticipate continuing or potentially occurring in 2026, such as presenting the proposed building code update. We anticipate, or that's scheduled every 3 years, and so that would occur next year. Finally, so we'll be preparing for that this year. Finalizing efforts that may carry over from 2025 to consider and adopt the I-25 sub-area plan rewrite, for example, to develop and approve an ordinance in support of the fast track development review process, and then the public land dedication ordinance. We anticipate continuing the comprehensive plan and transportation mobility plan major update into 2026. We anticipate potential study session to consider a construction waste roadmap for future action. Another study session to consider a zoning code update to allow micro wind turbines as a permitted use by right in residential districts. So just a little bit on this one. There's been one individual who has asked about this. Currently, these uses are permitted as a use by special review, so through a public hearing process, but this individual would like this to be considered as a use by right. And then, of course, there could be additional code revisions as may be identified. Looking ahead to 2027, I won't spend a lot of time here, but I will say that we would be looking to finalize and adopt the comprehensive plan and transportation mobility plan in 2027 if we haven't done it already in 2026. We do see that as a 2-year effort. And I can provide an update if you're interested tonight on where we are on that. But I will keep going for consistency here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this includes other planning efforts with flexible timing, and many of these are carryovers from the prior year. But we keep a list of general code cleanup items that we could always bring forward when we have time. So removing inconsistencies and incorporating clarifications throughout titles 16 and 17, which is the key Broomfield Code titles pertaining to our day-to-day work. We could see an update to the planning and engineering development review fees. Next slide, please. And as we begin and continue work on many of these initiatives, I want to take a moment to affirm that staff anticipates there will be opportunities for information sharing and public engagement related to these proposals. In general, the key stakeholder groups here anticipated to be involved are elected officials, advisory boards, Broomfield residents, Broomfield business owners, developers and builders, and staff across many departments. Engagement will occur through the Broomfield Voice project pages and subpages for various project elements, public meetings and public hearings as we do for our current planning projects. And each individual project will also establish a plan for engagement that we'll touch upon during study sessions, so you're aware of those plans. Next slide, please. All right, so discussion and next steps. So to recap, the purpose of this special report is to update City Council and the community on the plan development updates for 2025 in particular, with a preview of potential future work focus in 2026 and even 2027. Staff will begin bringing forward 2025 projects for consideration, starting with the very next agenda item on ADUs tonight. It's important that I stress for council and the community that this work focus for 2025 and the next couple of years is contingent on staff capacity to balance ongoing current development review responsibilities with long-range planning efforts to develop and/or update codes and plans. Staff will continue to prioritize typical development review duties to ensure the community can continue to experience the same level of customer service from the community development department that they're accustomed to. If an influx in development proposals are received, this may result in extending timeframes for the projects that we've listed tonight. Shifts in priorities, of course, among the many initiatives may impact staff's ability to proceed with current work focus and necessitate reprioritization of projects. So staff is seeking council support to proceed as generally outlined above, and also invites council to ask questions and, if desired, to provide alternative direction regarding listed priorities. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Merwin. We'll now go to council questions and comments. Does any member of council have any questions or comments? Let me go on the Zoom. I have a kind of a quick question, because it kind of came into my head when you're talking about our accomplishments and efforts to streamline our development review process and to do what we can to promote quicker development. But how many permits were not pulled from the approved projects from 2023 and 2024? They have approved plans from us. They're not waiting on anything from us, but they chose not to move forward yet, right? I know there were hundreds, if not thousands, but that seems to be coming up, because I found out that Thornton has the same situation. 8,000 permits were not pulled that they had anticipated, which really messed up their projections too. So
I don't think there was a municipality or county that didn't experience that. So that was throughout the state of Colorado. Not due to local government approval, but due to financing and interest rates and the residuals coming out of COVID. I think we're starting to have or experience some breathing room. We'll start to see movement, but there won't be a swing of the dropout. It'll be a gradual improvement, but everyone experienced that.
yeah. So it's kind of the moral of the story is we don't really control the pace of development in the end. We can do everything we can to hurry it up with a 90-day, process that Prop 123 wants. But even if we hurry up, we could be waiting just like we are right now.
Subject to so many additional outside factors that we can only control what we can control.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. We'll go to Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I will go first. Looking through the slides makes my eyes just kind of glaze a little bit. If I'm not answering your questions that you'd like, please let me know. But I think for the 2025, the flexible programs, I would prioritize the public land dedication ordinance, update to medium and high density residential zone districts, I think it is important for staff to have the ordinance where you pay for the water when you pull the permits. And then that was 1, 2. If I had to choose 3, I think those are my top 3. So we'll just
Okay,
pick
thank
3 for that. And then, oh dear. Is there anything else that you want us to really answer?
No, it would, it would mostly be if there was something that really spoke to you that you see in a later year that, you know, you feel you want to elevate for us sooner.
No, I think the 3 that I mentioned are the ones that I would elevate for the time being, at least for 2025, and then we'll continue on with 26 and 2027. I mean, I particularly think having the comprehensive plan update, the transportation plan update, and the I-25 sub-area plan update kind of go hand in hand in the same year in 2026 will be very important. So I think that should be a priority for that particular year.
They'll generally be tracking along together as somewhat separate projects between I-25 and the comp plan / transportation plan.
But other than that, those are I guess the only things I really have to say on the matter. I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Lim online next.
I think there. Okay. Thank you. There's a note under potential ongoing planning efforts with flexible timeframes that developers may be prepaying water and sewer fees, and you went over that in your presentation also. Could you give us an idea? Is that a sizable amount that is actually impacting the enterprise funds? And if it is a sizable amount impacting the enterprise funds, then I'm wondering if we should expedite that ordinance change so that those fees are due at the time of permits and they aren't prepaid.
Yes, so to the best of my knowledge, we get maybe 1, maybe 2 developers a year that seek to prepay. We get more that ask about it, and so it's often a topic of discussion, October, November. We try to queue it up to get them paid by mid-December, bring in that check by mid-December or so. If they're going to do that, there's nothing in our code that prohibits us from, or that allows us to prohibit the action. And the finance department has indicated that they would love to see this ordinance. So I think there must be an impact to them on some level. I can't speak to, the amount of dollars.
Councilmember Lim, there is an impact, and it's somewhere in the range between negligible and, depending upon the number of permits, manageable. So it's, while we should prioritize it, it's not something that is either going to generate a lot of money or make us either more resilient on the back end because we're getting those fees quicker than we would otherwise.
Okay, thank you. That at least gives me some assurance of a ballpark range there that it's not greatly impacting the water enterprise funds because, of course, everyone is well aware that we just raised the rates, and I would not want to think that we were avoiding bringing an ordinance forward that would, somehow adjust things so that in the future that the rates were lower because, if we can force the developers in a quicker fashion. Okay, so I guess that's okay if it's not that much. I don't have any direction on that. My other question is, from the sustainability perspective, certainly what staff is going to bring forward with the energy building codes is important. And that will be coming this year. I did have a question though on the construction waste, waiting until 2026. ACES had a session on that already in May of 24. That was a proposal that Mr. Rowe brought forward, and ACES actually approved that construction waste proposal and was told that it would come forward then in 2024, but it obviously did not. So is there any changes that staff foresees that need to be made to what was proposed in 2024 when it will be brought forward now as proposed in 2026? And are there any large projects that staff would foresee would be impacted by the fact that we didn't actually have it in the code as far as the what we wanted to be done with construction waste?
Councilmember Lim, I'm going to take the first part and then Lynn can speak to the development piece of that. Just as the mayor had indicated about the slowdown in those permits, part of it it's a balancing act. And so when we implement these codes that have an impact to our developers, we need to make sure that we're looking from a comprehensive totality of circumstances about what additional elements that have dollars attached. So when we're reviewing that in 2023 and 2024 for implementations, we know that between struggling with making their deals pencil without any additional regulations and or what they need to do with their construction waste is part of our conversation. So again, we can't have a tipping point to where we preclude development because the costs are such that they're having to deal with a whole host of other costs. So it's a balancing act. Ms. Merwin, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think, this is one that will be a complicated ordinance. We anticipate following a roadmap, which when you hear roadmap, it means there are multiple elements to consider. And so with all the legislative mandates on our, work program for this year, plus the comp plan, sub-area plan, we did not feel we had the capacity to take this one on this year in all candor. We are doing what we're calling phase one, which is sort of a light approach where we're developing best practices and guidelines to share with developers at the time of permitting. And we will also have that information on our website. So there will be information, and we will try and encourage folks to follow best practices, but we don't plan to, at this time, undertake a code update.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wynn.
No questions, just direction here. I think I agree, it makes sense, the priorities with the PLD, with the public land education requirements is a priority. Just because, we want to make sure that that's in place for continued, development. I also agree that the code requirements for construction waste management, again, I like where this is going. I don't really got any other thoughts. Just, yeah, looks good to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I don't really have any questions either. I guess my thinking is along the lines of Councilmember Lim. Wow, I can't speak tonight. And Ward, that I really do think that as far as the priority, density, development, and sustainability are kind of the top two for me, and then also obviously financial. So if there was a significant impact on our finances from the prepayment of fees, then I would definitely want to prioritize that. If it's not, if it's something we can, make work, then I'm okay with it in the timeline you've laid out. So the electrification, the energy codes, I think those are important, and then obviously development standards to get more housing built, which we all know is also subject to the market. So that's kind of my feedback. Thanks.
Thank you for your brevity. Anyone else? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate all this information in one place. There's so much work going on so many times that we don't, I think public, I mean, sometimes we don't even see everything that's happening. So I appreciate just seeing everything that's coming forward, everything that's already been done. And I see it, this is just a little bit of, I know we all have seen this. My frustration is that so much of this is driven by the state. And I just want to be able to do what we need to do here. So I'm glad you called out where we're being driven to take certain actions, not that it's necessary choice, but I will say I agree with what you have laid out and look forward to getting some of those big plans done. And hopefully we can keep working efficiently and moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other feedback, direction from council? Well, I support the plan. That's a lot of study sessions though. But oh boy. Well, thank you all
Get
for.
sick of seeing us.
No, it's okay. It's all necessary work that has to be done. So it's good to have a list of priorities to tackle it one bite at a time. So
Thank you very
all.
much for your time on this.
Thank you. All right, and lastly, our final item this evening is an update regarding an accessory dwelling units code update and the requirements of HB 24-1152. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Harburg is going to walk us through this next item. He is a senior planner.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name's Ted Harburg, Senior Planner. The topic of this presentation is our request for direction related to accessory dwelling units and recent Colorado state legislation. Next slide. So in October of 2019, Broomfield City Council approved an ordinance allowing accessory dwelling units, these are known as ADUs by short, as a permitted accessory use anywhere single unit dwellings are also permitted. The intention of allowing ADUs was to provide new and potentially less expensive housing options in the community. And then in spring of last year, 2024, the Colorado State Legislature passed a suite of land use bills. And one of these is HB 24-1152, which now requires many jurisdictions to allow ADUs anywhere single unit dwellings are also permitted. And although Broomfield already permits ADUs, the new state regulations include several other provisions that Broomfield's current ADU regulations do not include or allow. Next slide. So just a brief summary of our current standards. Broomfield's current ADU standards allow ADUs to be located either within the principal dwelling unit, attached to the principal dwelling unit, or detached from the principal dwelling unit. Our rules require the ADU to be no larger than 50% of the principal dwelling unit footprint. That's excluding any garage or related area, and to never be more than 800 square feet in size. We require one off-street parking space for every ADU. We require that the property owner occupy either the principal structure or the ADU on the lot as their primary residence. We do not allow ADUs to be used for short-term rentals, and we do not allow ADUs to be located in temporary structures such as RVs or mobile homes. Next slide. So I'm going to briefly run through some of the new state elements of the state legislation by topic. The new state legislation prohibits requiring the construction of a new off-street parking space for an ADU and provides the following exceptions. So jurisdictions may require the construction of one new parking space if it's located on a parcel that does not have an existing off-street parking space, such as a driveway that's already on the property, or if it's located on a block where on-street parking is prohibited for any reason, including access for emergency services. Jurisdictions may require the designation of an off-street parking space for an ADU if a space such as an existing driveway is already available. Next slide. The next element is the occupancy element. So the second provision from this new state legislation that we would like to go over tonight regards these occupancy requirements. Jurisdictions may no longer require that an ADU be owner occupied except under certain circumstances. And the exceptions are that a jurisdiction may require a property owner to demonstrate that they reside on the parcel when an application is submitted to construct or convert an ADU. This means that Broomfield could still require that the property owner demonstrate residence at the time that an application is submitted to construct or convert an ADU. And it's important to point out that Broomfield also prohibits ADUs from obtaining a short-term rental license. So this means that ADUs cannot be used for short-term rentals such as Airbnb in Broomfield. And the state encourages jurisdictions to regulate the use of ADUs for short-term rental. Next slide. So this is probably one of the biggest things from the state legislation. This is a prohibition on restrictive design. And this key provision says that subject jurisdictions may not apply any restrictive design, dimension, or standard to an ADU. And restrictive is defined within the state legislation, but the three items listed on the screen are really the ones that are most relevant for Broomfield to consider. A restrictive design standard would mean any architectural requirement such as style, material, or landscaping that is stricter for an ADU than for a single unit detached dwelling in the same zone district. So an example of this would be if there were a regulation that required an ADU to be constructed with brick, but which didn't require the same as the house, that would be considered restrictive. And to the best of staff's knowledge, Broomfield does not have any circumstances where a stricter architectural requirement would apply to an accessory structure like an ADU than to the principal dwelling. But with the caveat that we have many PUDs in town and we didn't look into every single one of them. But to the best of our knowledge, this does not apply. A restrictive dimension standard means any requirement that forces an accessory dwelling unit to be smaller than 500 square feet or larger than 750 square feet. Broomfield allows ADUs to be up to 800 square feet in size, but in some circumstances, an ADU could be forced to be smaller than 500 square feet. So this means that we would need to establish a minimum allowance of 500 square feet for any ADU. And finally, a restrictive dimension standard also includes any side setbacks for an ADU that are larger than the side setbacks for a primary dwelling unit in the same zone lot. This is rare, but staff did find some zone districts where the side setback for an accessory structure would be considered a restrictive dimension standard. And an example of this is Broomfield's E3 zone district. So that's an estate district, kind of large lots, which requires a 25-foot side setback for accessory structures, but only a 15-foot side setback for the principal structure. So that would need to be changed. Next slide. So the new state legislation also outlines a new voluntary program that could allow qualifying jurisdictions to apply for grant funding in order to encourage the construction of more ADUs. The details of the grant program to be administered by the Department of Local Affairs are still forthcoming, but jurisdictions are being encouraged to take the first qualifying step in the spring of this year to be eligible for the program outlined in the state bill or for future resources that may become available. To qualify as an ADU supportive jurisdiction, staff would need to submit information in a report due on June 30th of this year, demonstrating implementation of one or more approved strategies. Staff has assessed this list of strategies and has found that Broomfield has already implemented one or more of these strategies. As previously discussed, Broomfield prohibits the use of ADUs for short-term rentals, and regulating the use of ADUs as short-term rentals is one of the approved strategies listed by the state. Broomfield also does not currently require an additional water license fee when adding an ADU and does not require public land dedication for ADUs. And staff believes that Broomfield could make the case that these would qualify as strategies that encourage the construction of ADUs. We would also like to stress the potential impacts, increased staff time that may impact the timing of other work, that grant funding is not guaranteed, and participation may require additional ADU strategies or programs, and this would require a separate future study session to discuss these additional strategies and programs. Next slide. Some other potential related code cleanup items that have been identified for this update, beginning with the definition of terms like mobile homes, manufactured homes, modular homes, and tiny homes. So the Broomfield Municipal Code defines some of these terms, but not all of them. And the code definitions are not all consistent with the state's definitions. And this is relevant to the ADU code update because the code prohibits ADUs from being located in mobile homes, recreational vehicles, and other such temporary structures. And staff does occasionally receive inquiries about the use of tiny homes for ADUs. Now, tiny homes and tiny houses are not defined by our code, but they have specific meanings at the state level and within the construction industry. Absent additional language being added to the code, Broomfield today would issue a permit for a structure that meets the definition of a tiny home, so long as it is attached to a permanent foundation and served by the same utility services as the principal dwelling unit. Next slide. Some public engagement and next steps. Public engagement is proposed to include a Broomfield Voice webpage to collect any feedback while drafting an ordinance for consideration, and a notice of the code amendment in the community update. And if directed to move forward, a first reading is tentatively scheduled for March of this year. Next slide. So for our request for council feedback, we've split this into 2 slides. The first one really focusing on these state mandates of 1152. And the 3 questions here are, should Broomfield revise its ADU regulations to increase the minimum size of all ADUs to be at least 500 square feet, and to require the construction of 1 parking space for new ADUs on properties that meet the requirements listed on the screen, specific circumstances? And should Broomfield remove the property owner occupancy requirement consistent with the state legislation? Next slide. We'll go over the rest of the questions and then put them all on the screen. So this is a request for feedback related to tiny homes and the ADU supportive jurisdiction. Does council desire to clarify the code to allow tiny homes or tiny houses as ADUs? And if so, does council still want those to require a permanent foundation? And also, should Broomfield seek certification as an ADU supportive jurisdiction, citing the strategies on the screen in the report due in June? And finally, does council wish to direct staff to bring back a future study session to consider additional strategies to encourage ADUs? And on the next slide is a summary of all 5 of the questions and the sub-questions.
Very thoughtful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will go to council member questions and comments, starting with council member Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I really only have one question before I go in order of giving my comments. As it relates to the ADU requirements for foundations, the staff memo mentioned it, but it didn't really give a justification as to why that satisfied my mind, at least. So can we go over why we require a foundation for ADUs?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think for this, I'm going to look to Tim Pate, our chief building official.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Pate.
Good evening, council. I can answer that question. The reason that staff, my group would be supportive of keeping that in there is because of our soil conditions that we find throughout our city, and expansive soil, et cetera, is really the biggest issue. And so without having that on a permanent foundation or some kind of a permanent engineered tie-down system, then the potential for this structure would be able to move around a lot more.
So if an ADU doesn't have a permanent foundation, what are we talking? It would be sitting on wheels? Is it just sitting on cinder blocks? What are we, I mean, sorry, I had to, I've seen that. I grew up in Wyoming. So what are we looking at from that perspective if it doesn't have a foundation?
Okay, so currently, based on some recent 2 years ago, state legislation and Division of Housing has taken over, set up a program to inspect manufactured tiny homes in factories, or even somebody building one in their backyard, because it was never regulated before that. And there were a lot of complaints about that. So with that standard, the way it was adopted was it allows a local jurisdiction to require to be done on a permanent foundation if they choose to, based on their soils issues. When they're built, they are built on a chassis. So that's a requirement. That's the difference between a tiny home and a tiny house. In the International Residential Code, you can build a tiny house, which is similar with all the requirements adopted by the state, but that doesn't have to be on a chassis. So that's the difference between these 2 programs. So when the Division of Housing adopted their program, they used the appendix out of the International Residential Code as the basis for their program and their requirements to have it on a chassis. And the reason they do that is so that the manufacturers can take it to the site instead of putting it on a flatbed trailer.
Okay, so when they bring it to the property though, I get it's on a chassis, but is it still sitting on wheels and you just put skirting around it, or is it taken off the wheels and?
No. It would be required to maintain the chassis with the wheels on it. And there will be other jurisdictions in the state that would just allow that to be brought in and put down with some kind of a tie down. I'm not even sure how they're going to be doing that. I haven't heard what other jurisdictions would be doing. And then the concept is they could just move it at some point. So that is an option for the tiny homes that are built with the chassis and inspected and approved with the state tag. So I think that's part of the reason that question has been posed in the presentation tonight.
All right, thank you.
You are.
So now I'll just go on with answering the questions. I am perfectly fine with going into compliance with House Bill 24-1152. Some things that I could live without, but they're not that important to me, but there's other things in there that I think are really important. So yes, I would be supportive of increasing the minimum allowance for all ADUs to at least 500 square feet. I do not support having the construction of one parking space for an ADU. The number 3, should the Broomfield Municipal Code be updated to remove the property owner occupancy requirement consistent with state legislation? That's probably one I could live without, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. Yes, I do think our municipal code should be updated to have some mention and flush out tiny homes, tiny houses for ADUs. I'm not necessarily inclined to require a permanent foundation for those. And then I'm not set on going for accessory dwelling unit supportive jurisdiction. I don't think the benefits outweigh the costs at this point. Which I guess that does bring up one extra question. If we don't go for the qualification now, are we able to go for it in the future?
So that is unclear. However, because jurisdictions are being encouraged to take that step now, which would seem to suggest that the report due on the 30th may be the only opportunity.
Okay. Either way, it doesn't change my mind. I was just curious. I think those were all the questions, so
thanks.
That's it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Real quick though, did they give you any indication what kind of grant money they have for this with their huge deficit? We don't even know what the incentive is.
The grant program, the details are definitely not entirely clear. There is some language in the bill that describes what that grant money could be or could be used for, but the program itself is not in place yet. And Department of Local Affairs has not provided firm details on that.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. That was actually my first question. And I guess I'll skip to number 5 then, because I'm perfectly fine going with the, going for the certification if the benefits outweigh the cost. I mean, if we can get more grant money than it will cost us to implement it, and there's actually things that we can do with that money, then I'm all for it. Otherwise, it seems to be not worth the cost. So that's kind of my thought on that. Question for you on the square foot one. Because in the memo, it talks about tiny homes and tiny houses being less than 400 square feet, but then we're talking about putting a minimum of 500 square feet. So I'm kind of confused as to how this works.
The way I described that might have not have been entirely clear. A minimum of 500 would mean that they would always be allowed to be at least 500. So let me kind of explain what the problem might be. In some circumstances, say the principal dwelling was only 800 square feet. In that case, we would restrict an accessory dwelling unit to be no more than 400. What the state legislation is saying is that in all circumstances, they want property owners to be able to build an ADU of at least 500 square feet. So to not have a circumstance where we would force it to then be smaller than that.
Okay, so they can always build it at minimum of set 500, but if they wanted to build it 300 or something like that, they could do that.
Correct.
Okay, yes, that makes sense. And then the question on the foundation, I'm gonna guess it's significantly cheaper to bring in a tiny house on a chassis than to build a permanent foundation, right?
I'm gonna let Tim take this one.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I assumed. Okay. I'm all for building as much housing as we can. And I think ADUs, while they're not the end all to be all to solve our housing crisis, I think they are important function. So I'm supportive of making them as easy as possible for people to build and as cost effective for people to build as possible. So any extra cost is not something that I think we should do unless there's an actual reason to do it in my mind. So on number one, yes. Number two, no, I don't think the extra parking spaces is necessary. On the occupancy requirement, so that basically means the way our code is right now, the owner of the property has to live in the main house in order to have an ADU, right?
They have to live on the property, so they could live in the ADU or in the main house, but they have to reside on the property.
But if we made our code consistent with state legislation, theoretically, a property owner could rent the main house and also rent the ADU? Is that the way the state law would work?
Correct, but it would only be eligible for a long-term rental. That's 30 days or more because we require short-term rental licenses in order to have short-term rentals, and ADUs cannot receive a short-term rental license.
Okay, then number three, I am yes also. I was assuming that do not change the ADU requirement. I do not want to allow tiny homes to be ADUs. Yes, we should allow tiny homes and tiny houses. No, we should not require the permanent foundation. And then what?
Sorry, I think you were saying you don't want ADUs to be short-term rentals. Was that what you were?
Yes.
That's what I heard.
That's what you were, and so.
Sorry.
So then,
Yeah, yes.
okay,
My
so
fault.
you do, okay.
skipped
then
it, I skipped
Can
it.
you start on
Yes.
4 again?
Number three, I is yes. Number four is yes. Tiny homes and tiny houses, yes. We want to allow that. And no, we should not require a permanent foundation. Does that make sense? Okay. And then on 5 again, I'm fine with the certification if we get more than we give on that, so. Is that all that you needed? Okay, that's all. Thanks, Mayor.
You should talk to Councilmember Anderson about the soils and how her house is sliding. Saying. I don't know, y'all. Y'all not listening. You need to listen. All right, next we have Councilmember Cohen.
I just want to clarify, is chassis a plural of chassis?
Cassie.
Just teasing. To back on the hot topic of foundations, are mobile homes required to have permanent foundations in Broomfield? So what's the distinction, other than they're both sort of on a chassis, so they can be towed?
You want to answer this one again?
They come that way.
That's correct, that a mobile home is required to have an engineered tie-down system that's approved by the state when they come out and do the installation tag. So it's an engineered tie-down system for the wind, basically, is what those are for. For a soils condition issue, the state doesn't have any regulations for how those mobile homes, because mobile homes aren't built under the state guidance. They're still built under the federal HUD requirements. So I guess the answer is there's two things. There's a tiny home that's built and inspected, regulated by the Division of Housing now. The maximum size of that is 400 square feet to be a tiny home. Otherwise, it changes over into a modular home, which is the bigger, and those need to be on engineered foundations by the state rules. There's an appendix in the International Residential Code for tiny houses. That is an appendix that ties to the IRC residential code, and that would require a foundation. It's a little confusing. We've got two, that's
Yeah.
why these two
The
terms.
distinction is primarily size to a certain extent.
I would agree.
Okay.
With that 400 square foot, and under the state regulations, they defer to the local jurisdiction.
I mean, considering the purpose of a tiny home is really largely affordability, and then we adding a foundation, we're hurting the affordability. But it does make sense that we'd want tiny homes to be tethered to the ground, because like tonight, we're gonna have high gust winds. We don't want people getting blown over for safety purposes. So could we do tiny homes with just, I'm not sure what the legal word is, but that they're tethered to the ground appropriately, which would be cheaper than a foundation?
Agreed. We could work on some language that would say possibly an engineered foundation system or an engineered equivalent tie down. I mean, that's a real technical code term, but that concept. We could certainly work on that to give both options. But
those would also
we want a
deter
permanent- 'cause they're
theft.
permanent structures.
Yeah.
I mean, even though the concept is they've got the chassis with the wheels, you pick it up and move it, which you could do off a permanent foundation, but still taking up a tethered type system. They'd still, but the concept when it's being brought into our jurisdiction, or any jurisdiction, is that it's gonna put it there and it's gonna be permanent. But if you wanted to move it, you can move it elsewhere, but you're gonna have different wind and so on. So
Would you know what the estimated cost of a foundation for a tiny home would be?
I couldn't guess right now. I'm sorry. I could find out.
Over 1,000.
Easily. Yeah, especially because you at least have to dig down 3 feet.
Right.
For frost and concrete.
It seems to be counter to the whole concept of a tiny home, that it's not permanent and it's affordable. So, okay, thank you. That's helpful. On your list, I'm fine with 1. I don't think we should require a parking space. I don't think we have really an option on 3. I would 4, allow tiny homes or tiny houses as ADUs without the permanent foundation requirement, maybe just as you stated, an alternative, cheaper method. It still keeps them tethered and safe. I would seek the certification. Who knows? At some point they'll have money, maybe. So we'll be ready. Thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to go to Councilmember Lim online. Councilmember Lim?
Yes, thank you. Number 1, yes. Number 2, no. Number 3. Okay, number 3. My question is, I mean, I've heard concerns expressed about absentee landlords in some areas of Broomfield. So I'd like to hear someone's comment from staff to address, do you think removing this property owner occupancy requirement from either the primary structure or the ADU would indirectly increase absentee landlordism to a greater degree?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I would be able to answer that right now. Do you want to speak about that?
I would concur. I don't think we have any real data to share with you about whether, since it's not allowed today, technically, whether, approving number 3 would be, problematic or not. We hear anecdotally that there are investors who buy properties, and we do see investors come in and try to build ADUs illegally, honestly, and they get reported from the community, and we work with them to either bring them into compliance, or they have to file an affidavit that they won't use it as an ADU. But honestly, there's not a whole lot of control over it. So, you can see them occasionally. If you were really to follow it, you could see them advertised on Zillow or something afterwards. So, it is possible that absentee landlords are potentially an issue for some residents. On the other hand, it's a tough one because it allows a homeowner a great amount of flexibility in adding value to their home and maybe being able to leave for the winter, provided they comply with, the long-term rental requirement as opposed to short-term rentals. So a long answer to say, we don't have a whole lot of hard evidence to point to. It is one of those judgment calls that you'd need to make.
I guess my answer is yes, but if you need to look deeper, I mean, I appreciate your answer, anecdotally right now, but if you could look deeper and find something before the ordinance comes back, I guess I would appreciate knowing if there is any kind of data that this would increase absentee landlordism. So that's number 3. Number 4. Oh, number 4, what we didn't talk about was there were other questions in here about were we going to expand this to allow shipping containers and something else? So are we not answering those questions right now in relation to what direction we're giving?
That was not intended to be one of our questions. I think our assumption was we would keep that regulation the same, and this question was
Okay.
narrowly limited to tiny homes, but we're open to feedback.
Okay, no, that's fine. My fear with number 4 was somehow that shipping containers were going to be morphed into tiny homes, and I didn't want that to happen. So, okay. I think I agree with what Councilmember Cohen was saying about either it should have an engineered foundation or an equivalent tie down that Mr. Pate was describing. 5. My question on number 5, is there any sense in even considering this if we're not adopting the entire state's legislative direction there? It seems to me you don't seem sure about what the application criteria are going to be, but it seems to me like why would they even consider a municipality if they weren't going to adopt the entire state legislation?
Could you perhaps rephrase that question? I think I
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know if the application will require that the jurisdiction adopt the entirety of the state legislation as a requirement of being chosen as an ADU supportive jurisdiction?
So yes, a jurisdiction would need to be in full compliance with the requirements of 1152, but it does not need to adopt the full suite of recommended strategies. Jurisdiction only needs to adopt one of the list of one or more of the list of approved strategies to encourage more ADU construction, and the jurisdiction needs to be in compliance with the law. That is true.
Okay. No one has convinced me of the benefits that will proceed for Broomfield from that ADU supportive jurisdiction, so I would say no. And then I had one other question about HB 24-1152. And it states that any homeowners and HOAs that had ADU bans can consider building an ADU after June 30th, 2025. Could staff please clarify whether or not Broomfield has any local control in this matter? And what would staff suggest that Broomfield homeowners and HOAs who want to build HOAs do as a first step? Consult with their HOAs or consult with Broomfield first?
Councilmember Lim, this is Nancy Rogers. I could jump on that question. So,
Thanks.
Broomfield's ADU ordinance today applies everywhere in Broomfield. However, we have some residents that live in HOAs that have bans on those ADUs. And that's why up to this point, we've said, you know, if you're in an HOA, you got to check your HOA rules. You probably aren't going to be able to have an ADU. Those bans are going to go away come June 30th, 2025. And that's state law. The state regulates what HOAs can and cannot impose upon their communities. So, come June 30th, 2025, if a homeowner was in an HOA that had a ADU ban, that's off the books. They can now consider building an ADU. So then they would look at what Broomfield's ordinances would be and maybe start that process. But Councilmember Lim, I really appreciate your second part of the question. What should homeowners do first? They still need to check with their HOAs because House Bill 1152 allowed HOAs to impose reasonable restrictions, and the terms are slightly vague about what's going to be reasonable or not. So Mr. Hardberg was talking about, you know, building material requirements. We can go with color, right? A lot of HOAs have very strict paint requirements. So homeowners are still going to want to check with their HOAs to see what restrictions, if any, their HOA has imposed. And then once they have that information, then it would be the time to go to the city and start working with the city on the building permit.
Okay, thank you for that response. And I think I answered all the questions.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Lim and Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. So Councilmember Marshall-Shin asked all my questions, so I think we just got a slew of answers, hopefully. So for question number 1, appreciate the clarification because I was feeling very shaky on that one, but now it's a clear yes, so thank you for that. Question number 2, no. Question number 3, yes, we have to be compliant. Question number 4, yes, allow tiny homes as ADUs. And then for the second one, I was intrigued by the compromise that Councilmember Cohen proposed. So that would be a no, but I am open to that idea that he brought up. I think that was a good one. And then for 5, yeah, I'm a soft yes here, I guess, right? I'm very empathetic to the argument that Manager Hoffman always uses the saying, the juice, whether it's worth the squeeze. So if it's not worth the squeeze, you definitely don't have to do it, but I would be lightly in favor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, staff. Really appreciate it. I have no questions, but comments reside that I still support most of this, especially with, you know, an initiative to get more Broomfielders, more affordable housing or units available. I think where I might kind of differ on some of the other council members is I want to make sense, so to speak. Obviously, you know, they have to be compliant. There has to be some kind of certification process, like we talked about, how these homes are actually like compliant and people can live there. Ideally, you know, the one thing I emphasize is that we don't want folks to live in dangerous homes. We don't want folks to, you know, put up a 4x4 and just build like a cabin in their backyard. No, we want to make sure that these homes are actual homes and that they aren't being used as, you know, under like for Airbnbs or anything like that. Maybe they can if they're licensed, but That's for another day. Yeah, that's all my comments. Thank you.
All right, so you covered all 5. That was quick. Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go a little bit rogue tonight. I will say that the state is trying to implement something that cannot be implemented statewide. I feel like they don't have the funding for this. I don't feel like people have experienced enough about ADUs and how cost prohibitive it is. There's a reason why Broomfield only has 1 ADU so far.
Oh, there's 10 now, but that's been in 5 years.
Well, there's a reason why a lot of times too, like Broomfield High School has an ADU prepared, but no one wants to put it on their property because it's just cost prohibitive. So in addition to this, I'll answer these questions, but I do think that we need to analyze why is it so expensive to have an ADU in Broomfield and what can we do to make it more accessible for homeowners and more enticing for homeowners to take advantage of these programs. To be quite honest, I am going to be a no on that last one because I feel like we can have our own grant system. If we want to develop some sort of foundation so that we don't have homes going around, we can develop our own grant system. We're Broomfield, we can do that. Number 1, should Broomfield revise and I also want to as well look at other places too, like the Broomfield Housing Alliance. They've done some work in this, so I would like to, confer with them and always keep them. Anytime we have housing coming up, I want to make sure that they're being contacted and a part of this conversation because that's what they specialize in. So if we can learn from them and utilize their expertise, I feel like that would be helpful. And I'm going to be a little bit interesting tonight in saying that if we do have a registry for landlords, we can actually keep track of landlords who are a little lost in the mess, right? And these developers who are, homeowners and property owners who are being absent. So number 1, should Broomfield revise? Sure, yes. Number 2, I think that adds more cost to it, so no. Number 3, yes. Number 4, we can allow tiny homes or tiny houses, yes. I would say should develop a grant program where we develop a permanent foundation, if that's the case, to make our houses more safe, if that helps, our systems and to keep them more permanent. If not, and we find that it's more cost prohibitive, perhaps we do some sort of, soil analysis for them and give them sort of a heads up on, the home. And then number 5, should Broomfield seek certification as an accessory dwelling unit, supportive jurisdiction? I'm pretty much a hard no on that until I really hear any good reasoning, because we've seen where the state says they're going to have funding and they don't. And I'd rather not chase funds if they're not guaranteed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I have a question on number 1. What is the smallest home size in Broomfield, the standard single detached home? Are there many homes below 1,000 square feet?
That is a piece of information I do not have on hand, but we could look into that for the future, any future meetings.
Yeah, my only curiosity is that when we put that 50% in place, if the average, I don't think there's many homes below 1,000 square feet, so you would never really get below the 500 square feet. But I don't think we'd want, if you had a 600 square foot house, I don't think you'd want a 500 square foot ADU. So that was my only thinking there, but I think I can't imagine it really applying to many homes. So I would say it's fine to be 500 square feet. I'm kind of indifferent on the first one. I don't imagine it would really be very often that we would have that issue where they'd be below 500 square feet. So number 2, on the parking, I think it's fine to I don't want to start regulating and saying we have to require extra parking spots because we don't know everybody's circumstance. We don't know if they have a car. We don't know if they're somehow sharing the parking, the driveway of the existing home. So I think no on 2. And number 3 is the one I'm struggling with on I can see this both ways. So ideally we would have homeowners be the primary resident in one of those 2 facilities. So I almost want to say no on that one. On the tiny homes versus tiny houses, I appreciate the thinking about the tie downs. I am a firm believer in permanent foundations that are supportive of the house. You don't want to take a home that's of even if it's only $20,000 or $30,000 and not, and building on expensive soil. So I think it's less about, the permanent foundation and more about the soil samples and understanding just exactly what you're placing it on. So I would go a different route because I know from experience, the soil samples are really, really important. So I think it's less about the permanent foundation, more about those tie downs, the safety for the homeowners, the safety for the neighboring homes, because I don't know how heavy they are and if they would have any issues during heavy winds. But I would want to do it more from a safety aspect and ensuring that, I mean, it's kind of up to, if you're going to build the structure, you would want to make sure you're building on a firm foundation. So I don't think we have to require it, but I love the idea of looking into tie downs and appropriate measures for safety. And then on number 5, it really sounds like there really is no money. So I'm going to say no at this time. And it sounds like there may not be another opportunity, but I think that's a compelling argument though, but spend way too much staff time for a benefit that may never come. I think that covers all of them. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought up staff time. I'll get back to that after Councilmember Leslie. Thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you. I'll just say yes on all of them.
Thanks. Okay, so back to staff time. If you read the prior memo, it kind of alluded to, we're kind of in this moving target holding pattern because we don't know what the legislature is going to do to us next. And this is just one example of the overreach coming into our authority, which is going to mess up our plans. And there's going to be more of that with the TOC bill and other preemptive bills where it pushes our priorities in planning to the side because we now have to meet their arbitrary and sometimes illogical deadlines. So I'm just going to call it what it is. This is the even more overreach. I'm totally supportive of our ADU regulations as they are. We've had them in place since 2019. And ask me how many people in HOAs have asked me, why can't we build a tiny home? Exactly 0, because they don't want to. They live in an HOA that they've chosen because they like to live a certain way. And so what this is going to do is override the HOA local government and the agreement and the commitment that was made to the people who moved there. I find it fundamentally wrong because when you sign up for something, I moved to an HOA and I know that I can't build a shed. I can't have a single accessory dwelling unit. I have to abide by all these rules, but there's also no junk around. So this is something to consider because it's a slippery slope. We just follow blindly. We do whatever the state says, and soon we'll be obsolete. They'll just keep chipping away at our local land use authority and our authority, and we won't need to come here anymore. The state can just run everything. And if you believe in home rule authority, like I do, there's a reason why these decisions cannot be blanketed across all jurisdictions. There's a reason why we have to have local control because every community is unique. And this is just the start of them paring away our authority as local governments. So I'm fine with moving forward with, when I see the 500 feet, I'm thinking, well, that's restrictive, right? Because we didn't have a minimum. If somebody doesn't have the space to build 500 feet, well, then they can't build one. So that's exclusionary. Parking really depends on where the house is. There aren't many streets in Broomfield where you can't park on the street, but I think that exception makes sense. The property owner occupancy requirement, it could get messy, again, as council members have stated that, there are absent landlords. And what if, your neighbor doesn't have a way to enforce some type of crazy living situation where there's 12 people in a tiny home and there's no governance there. I think the tiny home and tiny house addition is good. But I think a permanent foundation makes sense. That is what staff is recommending. And these are the subject matter experts on this, not us. So I hear that. I respect the folks that have done this their whole lives. And there's a reason why my house is on an engineered floor, 18 inches from the ground. So it kind of floats. I didn't renew about this until I moved here, but I'm lucky that I have a house like that. And they probably should build all houses like that moving forward, but they didn't. And so many of them are sinking. You see the cracked foundations, you see the cracked driveways, my steps. So the soil is not something to just dismiss. And as you already know, I think number 5 isn't worth it because again, as staff said, this would require extra staff resources and including up to hiring more FTEs. So that's, you know, again, an unfunded mandate from the state for us to comply. We have to change our priorities, expend more resources when we're already constrained, and they don't care. They're not going to help us subsidize any of this. So that's my thoughts. And when you guys give direction that's not in this list, such as soil sampling or not following the codes for uniform traffic code, staff's going to need clarification because that's sending a message in a different direction than what was asked, and that would require more study, more resources, another meeting. So I want to circle back to Manager Hoffman because Councilmember Marsh Holshan made a request that we need to clarify on not following the code, the uniform traffic code in your prior comments. No, am I wrong?
Neighborhood calming.
Yeah, I made a mention of something to do with a future conversation about traffic stuff. So, comment.
Okay, so it's not requesting direction.
I think that's something that we'll discuss later. I don't think it's something we have to discuss tonight.
Okay. When? I mean, that would have to come forth as a request for future action, is what I'm saying.
No, I think it was part of the conversation with traffic, and I don't really think that that's something we need to discuss right now.
Manager Hoffman?
Step, but so that part of it, I want to manage the expectation for staff when we come back in October that we're not going to have a piece about neighborhoods not having to follow the model traffic code. I just want to make sure we don't come back in October and have additional information about the neighborhoods not having to do that.
Does that make sense?
I have no idea what you're asking of me. And I really honestly don't appreciate you pointing me out like this. I was just making a comment along with Councilmember Del Duguito's comment about different action plans, and that was kind of my same comment with different action plans. When I also mentioned the speed cameras, just like Councilmember Cohen mentioned red light cameras. It is all part of the comments. It wasn't request for specific action. It was just a comment on what I'd like to see. It's something that I may bring up at that time, I may not.
Okay.
But
well,
I don't think, I don't,
staff clarification.
I don't think there was any,
Me.
yeah, I don't think there's any non-clarification. I think it was just a comment along with everybody else's comments.
Okay.
I'm not sure why I'm being pointed out on that, so.
Well, I also have to ask Heidi. Councilmember Hinkle, what about this soil analysis? Because that would be another thing that's not listed.
All I'm saying is that if we decide as a council to just say that if we're not going to require a permanent foundation, if we need to, we've done this before with other properties where we do soil analysis. And if you're building anyway, I'm assuming, being in the real estate business, you kind of have to know all those sorts of things anyway. I don't know if that's part of the building process. Maybe I ask you guys, is that part of the building process? Do you do a soil analysis anyway?
I'll let Mr. Pate answer this.
Currently, if you were getting a permit for building a new house, we would require a soils analysis. Currently, if someone came in for a permit for an ADU that met our current requirements, we have not been requiring a soil analysis when that's going in the backyard.
And then what is the cost of a soil analysis? Is it per square foot of the planned unit, or how does that work?
No, it wouldn't be based on the size of the square footage. The soils report, the soils company, testing company would come in and do at least one drilling log in the middle of the footprint and take it down as deep as they need to, depending, I'm not sure what the parameters are.
Okay.
And then they would produce a soils report to see what type of soil and how deep it is. And then the design, the foundation is engineered and it's based on that. But we don't do that for an ADU. We require the foundation itself to be designed to be down below frost depth, and that's been standard with our current process.
And Councilmember Hinkle, we don't pay for that.
And another question then, would a soil sample make sense on an ADU, possibly next to another building that's already been established there, who already possibly has that soil testing already done before the bigger building was?
That's a good point. We don't have history with a lot of ADUs, as it's just been pointed out. So the couple that I'm familiar with, the existing permit records don't have a copy of the original soils report, but we would accept the soils report for the house for the design of the foundation system for the ADU. Now, the ADUs are a lot smaller footprint. The house could be a lot bigger and be on or have an engineered caisson and grade beam system and possibly a structural floor, as you pointed out. But we have not, trying to help the affordability to the smaller units, the smaller footprints, to allow just an engineered foundation that would be not matching. If it was attached to the house, the building code would require that foundation to be the same as whatever the house is. So if you had engineered caissons for the house, then that addition, which could be an addition for an ADU, because we allow that, then that would have to be. But if it's a detached structure, which would be similar to, say, a barn, we don't require soils reports for that.
Okay. What is the risk if someone builds an ADU without that permanent foundation to come back to the city and county? Do we have any risk or liability? That's what I want to set,
I would defer to Ms. Rogers.
No, I don't believe we would have any liability for the injuries or the property damage that might occur.
Okay, I just wanted to look into that. If it's affordable for them to have some sort of soil sample, maybe even from the surrounding buildings already that we already have on file, I would like to share that with them. Just so that if they know they're on expansive soils, if that makes a difference structurally. I'm not an engineer, obviously, but it sounded like it was important to you all to have these structures on a foundation. So I would say if it's an affordability issue, do what we can to make it more affordable. But if they want a permanent foundation, they want to pay for it. Or if we have grant programs, I think that's also a viable option too. But I'm just trying to understand, the landscape in that regard.
Yeah, you bet. From my position, staff position for the permanent foundation, it would be consistent with the way we enforce the design codes for both residential and commercial projects. They're embedded in the adopted codes that the cities adopt every 3 years. And so that would be for even a tiny house. If we had adopted the appendix out of the IRC, that appendix defers to the body of the code for the foundation requirements. So it just, the only thing in the appendix is it gives you the reduced size of rooms. You can build a loft, little sleeping loft, and it has some size restrictions. You don't have to have a stair up to the loft. There's lots of things that are built into that by the code people and the tiny home coalition folks to be able to create these small structures that are safe. I mean, they meet the energy codes, they meet means of egress. You have an escape window in the loft where the bedroom is. They're designed that way in the building code, but that, if you build it under the appendix, that has to have a foundation. So that's the difference, where when the state took over, set up their program for tiny homes, their 400 square foot, they matched the same requirements. They pulled that appendix language when that, and I was fortunate to sit on the technical advisory committee with the state to help develop that code last year or 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
I just wanted to follow up since we have the expertise here on, I don't expect us to be flooded with tiny homes because they aren't that affordable, but they are an option. But I know in Denver has affordable tiny homes. The homeless, the SOS camps have used them, but they're on asphalt. And I think that's the simple, they're just tethered to asphalt. But were there options given other than foundation? They could just be on a concrete slab or anything to that nature? I mean, do we have options if we go this direction? Some way to make it as simple as possible.
That would coincide with the discussion that could be, we would consider that as a potential, as we move forward with language to say that would be an equivalent alternate design, because you're putting it on. Yeah, I'm familiar with those. The projects that Denver has done, which have been really great with the small affordable housing units. And we just want, with that type of situation where it's on concrete or it's just a slab, we want to make sure it doesn't blow away.
Right.
Because now it's changed from the lateral load wind event from a movement from the soil, because the soil is going to move up the whole parking lot, and we got some different problems.
Do you know, I don't know if you know, and if you don't, it's fine, whether any other cities have adopted tiny homes to the, I know Denver has, I believe, but I don't know if anybody else has adopted policies welcoming tiny homes in this sense.
In terms of adopting the appendix out of the IRC, I know some have done that. I can't give you right away. We would accept a design based on the appendix. We did not adopt that particular, but that would be an approved alternate method, alternate design.
So there might be some models out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the
Thank you.
Division of Housing, they are the ones that have the program right now. So if they're somebody's building it in their backyard or in a regular factory, it's fully regulated and inspected, which was a huge step in the right direction from that state legislation 3 years ago.
Okay. Thank you much.
All right, thank you. Is there any other second round comments or questions from council? Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, so I had one last thought on these permanent foundations, the tiny homes and the tiny houses. And I think one piece that we don't want to overlook here is we don't want anybody coming in with a home that doesn't look like it's permanent, like where it looks like it's just been dumped in the backyard or something. So I think that's a critical piece that we haven't really discussed. Like if there's a foundation, it's attached and then it's permanent, but if we're talking about anything else, there's that might be that perceived look that it doesn't really belong there. I think that's just something critical that we need to consider. And in response to the mayor's comments, I think we do whatever route we go here, it has to be built on what is, I think we need staff's recommendations on what is alternatives. If they do come with a chassis and they can be put on a temporary foundation, is there an exception where they can be put on the temporary foundation, or do we always want the permanent foundation? But I do want to consider the fact that we do need to look to the expertise and make sure they're all properly, they'll have proper foundations, whatever they might be. I don't know all the technologies used here, so I'll just leave it at that. So I appreciate the work in this area. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Well, thank you all for the discussion. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? There being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Thank you.